When I first started doing acrylic pours, it was a complete disaster. Nothing came out right. And then I found out that the reason isn't that I'm artistically challenged, which is probably true, but the fact that with acrylic pouring there are so many variables that it's hard to know what to do right the first time you try it. So I'm going to do a series of experiments comparing various techniques of acrylic pouring to see which works best and which don't work. So first off, the one thing I want to emphasize is I always use Artist Loft's ready mixed acrylic pour paint. And the reason is the first several times I tried, I could not get the right amount of pouring medium and paint so that all of the paints came out the same viscosity or thickness so that they all moved correctly when you poured them. As soon as I switched to this, I noticed two things. First of all, I actually saved money. A lot of people complain about how expensive these are, but in fact, you don't waste money. When you're a beginner, throwing away mixes that just don't work. They're convenient, and if you shop smartly, these are carried by Michaels, you can always find coupons for saving an enormous amount of money for these. These run about $14 a piece, and except for the white, which you use a lot for prepping the canvases, they go a long way. For this first test, I'm going to be trying to determine which is best as far as canvas preparation. I'm going to pour one that's dry, one that has a very, very thin coat of the white, and one that has a poured on coat, a much thicker coat of the white. I'm using the same amounts of the same colors on each one, and we'll see if there's any difference. So let's get started. All three tests are going to be simple dirty pours onto the center of the canvas. This is the dry canvas. And now for the pour. Let's speed things up to save a little time. And it looks like it's pretty much stopped and it's not going to spread anymore. So let's put this one aside and try the next one. For the second canvas, I'm brushing on a very thin layer of the white paint. Again, let's speed things up a little. What I noticed this time is the pour spread out much more evenly. Let's move on to the thick coating test. And here we are. What I did is I poured a large quantity of the white pourable acrylic in the middle, and then I lifted and tilted the canvas until the whole thing was covered with a thick flowing layer of the acrylic. And let's see how it moves this time. All right, what I'm observing is that the poured on paint is flowing outward and pushing the thick layer of white paint ahead of it, so we actually have a raised surface of white paint along the leading edge of the colored paint, and it's acting like a dam almost, preventing it from spreading as much. What I'll do now is put these on a drying board and let them finish spreading as much as they want, and we'll do a comparison. And here are the final results. Now off camera, I tilted the canvases to spread the paint around a little bit. Now, if these look pretty bad, remember, these are my very first pours. I'm recording my mistakes and if hopefully some successes as I learn to do acrylic pouring and making these videos to pass what I've learned on to other people who might be in the same situation, just starting off. And I've learned quite a bit from this experiment. The first thing is that, if you remember, I supported the canvases on parallel strips of wood for the pouring so that it could drain off the sides. Big mistake. What I learned is that the acrylic paint, as it dries on those boards, is a pretty good glue, and I had a hard time breaking them loose. Also, wherever the glue pooled on the boards, it was very slow to dry. What I found works better, instead of the boards, and is more convenient, is to use push pins at the corners. This supports it, and it's far enough away from the edges so you don't have to worry about drips collecting there. Another thing is that once the edges have pretty much stabilized as far as drip wise, you want to rub your finger or something to pick up all the drips. Those drips will take a long time to dry. And speaking of drying, although this medium is supposed to dry within 24 hours, doing pours, and these were fairly thin pours, I found it took a good 48 to thoroughly dry, and it's still a little soft. I wouldn't feel comfortable framing these for another day or so. The next thing I learned is that you may be asking yourself, hey, where did the blue go? Where did the yellow go? Well, it turns out that if you have blue and yellow next to each other, there's enough mixing going on that even though you might get stripes, you can expect it to combine and turn into green. So if you have blue next to yellow, you might as well not bother putting any green in there because everything's going to turn out to be green. One of the most surprising discoveries I made with these first attempts was that the dirty pour, which is one of the simplest things you can do with acrylic pouring, is a lot harder than it looks. What you need to learn to do is, as you're rotating and pouring, to move in nice clean circles. They tend to be ellipses and they tend to drift. Getting good constant circles is tough. Another problem I found is that I tended to move up and down as I poured, and that created a non-uniformity in how fast the paint was applied to the canvas, and that had a big deleterious effect on the quality of the image. All right, now we get to the main purpose of this experiment, to see which worked the best, a dry canvas, a slightly damp canvas, or a thick layer of white paint all over the canvas. And what I found is the lightly dampened canvas worked the best. The dry was too slow in moving, and the dryness caused the paint to dam up, and it tended to roll on the edge and you got too much mixing. The heavily coated canvas, it moved too fast. When I started to tilt it, it would just rush off and it was very hard to control. It's also very messy, and because you ended up using almost as much paint to coat it as you did to actually do the pour, it's also about twice as expensive as the other two. My favorite was where I just lightly brushed on a thin coat of the white paint to get things started. Well, that's pretty much the end of this first test. I've learned a lot, and our next test is going to see how the paint is poured into the cup before the pour, how that affects the resulting pour. So, until then, I hope you'll check out my main website at waynesthisthandthat.com, and as always, thanks for watching.